A 7-year-old girl was taken into the forest by her biological father and left behind in a snake pit, as if she were nothing more than a burden to be discarded. No one spoke up, no one searched. Only a car headlight cut through the night, and a hand reached out, just in time. From that touch, a brutal truth buried for 4 years began to unravel. She doesn't need a hero. She just needs someone who won't walk away. Don't tell anyone your dad brought you here, got it? Andrew yanked the gear lever, eyes flicking up to the rearview mirror, as if afraid the girl's gaze might pierce through his thoughts. A man in his 40s, gaunt and slouched, the kind of posture worn by someone long indifferent to appearances. The stale smell of old cigarettes clung to his collar, his hair, even his voice. He didn't speak loudly, but every word landed dry and sharp, the voice of someone used to giving orders, not answering questions. Lila, 7 years old, smaller than other kids her age, had large, dark eyes, always seeming veiled by a dull haze, the look of a child too familiar with enduring things in silence. She didn't nod, didn't ask why. She just quietly tightened her grip and reached into the pocket of her coat, pulling out a piece of paper, folded many times. A photo of her mother. Her mother was smiling in the picture, a gentle, tilted smile, as if leaning toward her. But time, rain, and a child's fingers had faded the ink, blurred the corners. Only the eyes and half a mouth still held onto a trace of tenderness. The car rattled down a bumpy dirt road, the wheels jolting each time they hit a pothole, rocking Lila back and forth. Forest on both sides, dense and harsh. The trees jutting up like bones, showing through an old body's skin. Lila pressed her face against the glass, looking out. The farther they went, the stranger the surroundings became. No school, no corner store, no evening market. Only trees, rocks, and drooping canopies, heavy as if weighing down the sky. Lila had once lived somewhere else. She couldn't remember the name. Only that, every morning, birds sang on the kitchen roof, and her mother would stand by the sink, humming a song she never finished. Then one day, her mother disappeared. Dad said she was crazy, not fit to raise a child, that the court had ruled, and from now on, Lila would live with him and Miss Gloria. But Lila knew her mother would never let her eat instant noodles 2 days in a row. Her mother would never make her sleep on a cold floor. And her mother would never shout, "Shut up," just because she cried in the middle of the night. "You hungry?" Andrew asked suddenly, like someone remembering a chore. Without waiting for an answer, he tossed an empty milk carton behind him. It hit the seat and rolled onto the floor. "We'll get food soon when we stop." "Dad." "Where are we going?" Lila asked hesitantly. He laughed, a dry, weary chuckle. "Just a little trip. It's boring at home." She didn't reply, but something inside her shrank. Grown-ups only say, "a little trip," when they don't want to tell the truth. She'd heard her mother say that once, when she carried her suitcase out the door for the last time, and never came back. The car came to a sudden stop. Lila lurched forward, clutching her teddy bear for balance. Wind slipped through the cracked window, bringing the damp smell of forest soil and the sharp chill of late-season cold. Andrew said nothing. He got out, walked around the back. Lila watched him stand still for a moment, staring into the woods, where grass grew knee-high and crumbling stones littered the ground. No warning signs, no footprints, just an abandoned stretch of earth, so silent it felt like sound itself had been swallowed. "Get out!" He didn't turn around. "Dad, is Mum coming too?" The question escaped Lila's lips like a last reflex, frail and trembling. "I've got stuff to do. I'll come back later. Stay put. Don't go anywhere." She obediently stepped out, clutching her bear and the photo. Andrew tossed her small cloth bag to the ground. without a word. He slammed the car door, strode to the driver's seat, and didn't glance back at the child once. "Dad," Lila called after him, her voice cracking. He didn't stop. "I'll be good. Please don't go." The engine roared. The car turned sharply. Wild grass kicked up in a dusty swirl, hiding his silhouette among the trees. And then he was gone. Lila stood there, unmoving. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She quietly crouched by a low tree root, arms wrapped around her knees, body curled like a leaf folding in the cold wind. Silence fell over the forest. The stillness was so deep, even her own breathing sounded foreign. A soft rustle behind her made Lila spin around. From under the grass, a red-tailed pit viper raised its head, gliding past her as if her presence meant nothing. It didn't attack, didn't rush. It simply slid by, like a boundary between life and death. The snake disappeared behind a rock, just like her father. No turning back. No remorse. Lila whispered, lips trembling. "Mum will come. Right?" The wind picked up, snatching the photo from her hands. She scrambled to retrieve it, hugging it tightly to her chest, clutching the last thing she had left in the world. The sun had fully retreated behind the mountains. Light was fading, as if it too couldn't bear to witness what remained. The girl stayed there, alone. No one knew. No one came. Until, from deep within the forest, a headlight slashed across the night. Not the moon, not a dream, a real light. Coming closer. The black SUV turned onto a dirt path by the forest, a shortcut few people remembered. In the back seat, Nathan Grayson sat still, draped in an old, wrinkled black suit. His gaze stretched out through the window, as if piercing the shadowy pine trees. He was around 40, with strands of grey already streaking his temples, the remnants of grief from his wife's sudden death 5 years ago. On his lap rested a simple bouquet of white flowers. Nothing fancy, just enough for a grave he had never forgotten. Peter, the loyal old driver, in his 60s, glanced at the rearview mirror and spoke up, for no particular reason. Some days he didn't say anything, but today, something pressed on his chest, like a weight that wouldn't lift unless he let something out, anything at all. "You know," Peter said, gripping the steering wheel tightly, "when I first got married, I used to think I wouldn't survive if she went before me." Nathan didn't respond. He remained still, the bouquet unmoved on his knees. The vehicle continued crawling past tree roots and scattered pebbles crunching softly under the tires. The sun had set half an hour ago, leaving behind only an ashen grey light, like a memory. The SUV suddenly slowed, not because of a pothole or sharp turn. Peter frowned and tilted his head. "Do you hear that?" Nathan opened his eyes. Inside the cabin, beyond the engine's hum and the forest's nighttime whisper, they both heard something. Faint, broken, like a kitten's cry. No, more like a small sob, quiet and trembling. Peter brought the car to a full stop and turned off the engine. Neither of them spoke. Nathan gently opened the door and stepped out. The cold air rushed in like an uninvited touch. He walked a few steps, then paused, looking up at the darkening trees. The sound came again, closer this time, very faint, nearly lost in the wind. Peter made a move to follow, but Nathan raised his hand. "I'll check." No rush, no urgency. Nathan stepped off the roadside, pushing past the low brush, his shoes rustling against the dead leaves. The woods gradually opened up, and just a few meters in, he saw her. A tiny figure, huddled tight against a gnarled tree trunk, as if trying to disappear into the wood and vanish from the world. Her thin shirt was frayed at the hem, tangled hair covered half her face, and her hands clutched her trembling knees. In her small palm, She held an old, crumpled photograph, its edges blurred by tears. Her eyes were wide open, not just afraid, but carrying something far more haunting. The absolute loneliness of a child, too young to understand why she was left behind, yet already fully aware of what it means to not be chosen. She recoiled at the sight of Nathan. He stopped, knelt. No closer. He looked into her eyes, not searching for words of comfort, not trying to be friendly. He simply took off his coat, held it out and said softly, "You're really cold, aren't you?" The girl bit her lip, her body shaking like a leaf in the wind. Are you a bad guy?" The question made Nathan pause. He gave a small nod, then lowered his voice, almost to a whisper, meant only for himself. "I'm not leaving you here." She stared at him for a long moment, then slowly reached out to touch the edge of the coat. The moment he draped it over her shoulders, she leaned into him. Suddenly, without warning. Nathan wrapped his arms around her, holding tight to something that felt like it was breaking inside him. A feeling long buried, part ache, part warmth. A few minutes later, Nathan carried the girl back to the car. Peter opened the rear door without a word. His gaze softened when he saw the girl still clutching the teddy bear and the photo. Inside the SUV, Nathan gently laid her across the seat, tucked the coat beneath her head, then turned to Peter. "Nearest hospital?" Peter nodded, started the engine. 14 miles north. Silence settled between them. The engine stirred again, headlights cutting through the dark. Nathan looked out the window, this time not to forget, but to remember. That patch of brush, that tree, the place where a child had been left behind. But not forever. The SUV rolled on, leaving behind a quiet, still darkness. But this time, it didn't swallow life whole. This time, the light had made it in. Outside, the wind swept along the glass-lined corridor, carrying the sound of branches gently tapping against the old stone walls. Kingswell County Hospital was never a noisy place, but the silence here was no more comforting. The scent of antiseptic and the dim flicker of fluorescent lights created a space that was far from warm. Everything seemed to be holding itself together, not breaking, not speaking, just existing. In room 208, Lila lay curled up on the edge of the bed, her head turned to the wall. The pillow was too large for her small face, making it seem as though her whole body was being swallowed. A stuffed bear rested against her chest, and a coat that smelled faintly of wood smoke had been carefully folded at the foot of the bed. Nathan sat in the chair beside her, back straight, hands clasped together, eyes fixed on the girl. The soft click of heels on the stone floor signaled someone approaching. The door opened slowly. Eleanor Monroe, a social worker. She entered with a thin file in hand, followed by Dr. Samuel Lee, the one who had examined Lila the previous night. She paused when she saw Lila sit up abruptly, shrinking into the corner of the bed like a startled rabbit, instincts kicking in. "She's still very shaken since she was found," he said quietly. "But last night, in her sleep, I heard her calling someone's name." Eleanor gave a slow nod, then sat down at the edge of the bed, keeping just enough distance. Her voice was neither loud nor overly gentle, simply the voice of someone who had long grown familiar with pain. "Can you tell me what happened, Lila?" The girl remained silent. Her eyes flicked to Eleanor, then away again, as if weighing safety against danger. Her small hand began to tug lightly at the edge of the blanket, and after a long while she whispered, "Dad said we were going on a trip. But he didn't bring food. He only brought a plastic box and told me to sit there by the grass. Then he left." Dr. Lee lowered his eyes. His face gave away nothing, but his eyebrows drew together slightly. Eleanor continued, slowly and softly. "Did you see anyone else?" Lila nodded, still clutching the blanket. "There was a snake that slithered by. But I didn't cry. Because Mum said, crying means you're scared. And I didn't want Mum to be scared." The room fell into absolute stillness. No one overreacted. Eleanor simply stood up and stepped outside with Dr. Lee. As the door closed, Nathan turned to look at Lila. She had turned on her side again, facing the wall, shoulders still trembling. In the hallway outside, Eleanor leaned against the wall, exhaling slowly, like someone emerging from deep water. "Her story is consistent," she said to Dr. Lee. "Genuine emotions. But we need evidence." Lee nodded. "I clearly see signs of malnutrition, some old bruising around the wrists, but it's hard to conclude anything without further testimony." Eleanor sighed. The next morning, the hospital filed an urgent report about an unaccompanied child showing signs of abandonment. By protocol, the case was flagged as suspected abuse. The system automatically triggered an investigation. 3 people were sent: Officer Carter, Jr., to Sheriff Tom Whitaker, Nora Quinn, a trauma psychologist from the neighboring state, and June Marlowe, an independent welfare officer, summoned to ensure objective assessment. All 3 were called in by Sheriff Tom himself, just before dawn. The sheriff, now past 50, a former Marine, was not known in the region for being tough, but for his ability to listen and to distinguish between a child who lies and one who has been left alone so long they no longer know who to trust. He was not easily swayed, but this time the girl's words and Nathan's gaze had kept him up all night. Kids make up stories to avoid going home to a parent. It's not uncommon, especially after a divorce. No one argued, but no one wholeheartedly agreed either. On the other side of the glass wall, Nathan stood, holding Lila's old coat. He hadn't heard the whole conversation, but the last sentence was enough. There was no anger on his face, only a silence so heavy it seemed to compress the room. He reached into the coat pocket, pulled out a torn piece of paper folded in 4. Unfolded, it revealed a crude pencil drawing, a forest, a car, a figure walking away, and a tiny child sitting in the grass. No one teaches children to invent details like that. That night, rain began to fall. The sound of droplets on the hospital's tin roof echoed steadily, like a clock ticking slower than usual. Lila woke close to midnight. She turned her head and saw Nathan still there, head tilted to one side, asleep in the chair with her coat draped over him. She looked at him for a long time, then whispered softly, not quite sure if it was for herself or for the man sleeping nearby. "Do you believe me?" Nathan didn't open his eyes, but he gave a small nod, barely perceptible, as if he had rehearsed it beforehand. "If I didn't," he said, voice low and steady, "I wouldn't still be here." On the old wooden table by the window, a half-burned candle flickered in the dying light of late afternoon. The small house nestled deep within a sparse forest, where Rachel, Lila's mother, had lived in seclusion for the past 4 years. No fixed address, no visitors, just a few worn books, 2 picture frames turned to face the wall, and endless bone-chilling nights, as if even time had stopped caring to pass. She sat at the table, holding a folded local newspaper, rereading a small article buried between classified ads and sports results. Unidentified young girl found in Kingswell Forest, currently receiving treatment at the regional hospital. Police have yet to release further details. No name, no photo, but somehow those faded lines crushed her chest. The words stirred something Rachel thought she had lost. Hope, fragile, foolish, and likely to rip her heart open once more. 4 years ago, Rachel Bennett had been a wife, a mother, but was branded mentally unstable after a murky divorce. Andrew Bennett, her ex-husband, was a composed manipulator, skilled at making everything and everyone work in his favor, just to be with his mistress. A brief trial, a fabricated psychological report, one short sentence from the judge. The child should be with her father, and that was all it took to strip Rachel of her custody rights. Since that day, she had lived like a fugitive, but her only crime was loving her daughter in a way the world refused to accept. That afternoon, Rachel stepped into the courtyard of Grace Church, a place she had prayed in countless times, never once receiving an answer. Reverend Jonah Wells was sweeping dead leaves. In his 60s, the only pastor in the area, a man who rarely intruded, but had a quiet way of making others open up just by being there. Jonah wasn't the preaching type. He was the man who sat silently at hospital bedsides, the one who remembered the birthday of a child who had moved away 3 years ago. He saw Rachel and paused, leaning the broom against the wooden fence. "I take it this isn't just a Sunday visit," he said, his voice as calm and steady as the man himself. Rachel stayed silent, pulled the newspaper from her bag, and handed it to him. Only after he read it did she speak. "You once said, if I ever needed to talk, come back here. I need to listen now." Jonah nodded. "You think it's her?" "I don't know," Rachel whispered, "but something in me won't let me sit still." The Reverend looked at her, then turned toward the sanctuary behind him. "You should speak with Mary Ellis. She still lives near your old place. Poor eyesight, but a sharp memory. She watches quietly, never meddles. If anyone in town remembers what kind of mother you were, it's her." Mary Ellis's house sat beneath an old maple tree, across the trail that led to the old forest. She had once been a friendly neighbor, never too nosy, never one to gossip. Perhaps that's why she was one of the few people Rachel still wanted to see. The old woman answered the door when Rachel knocked, her eyes cloudy with age, but still able to recognize the figure on the porch. "Rachel, you're still alive." "Oh no, I'm sorry. I meant, you're still in this town?" Rachel let out a faint laugh. She used to hate that half-joking tone, but now it felt oddly comforting. They sat in the kitchen, dimmed by smoke-stained walls. Mary poured tea, handed Rachel a broken biscuit, and rested her elbow on the table to examine her closely. "I remember you. You used to wheel that stroller out to the balcony every morning, singing to the girl. What was her favorite song again? Somewhere Over the Rainbow?" Rachel nodded, eyes red. "You were a good mother," Mary continued, "but your husband, he told folks you were out of control, screaming at night, throwing chairs through windows." "That never happened," Rachel interrupted, not angry, just clear. "I know," the old woman replied, "but back then, this town found it easier to believe than to ask." Silence lingered. Finally, Mary placed her hand on Rachel's and gave it a light squeeze. "If you believe that girl is Lila, don't hesitate. She needs to hear her mother's voice, even if it's only once." That night, the Kingswell Hospital looked the same as always. Yellow lights, the steady rhythm of machines, endless corridors stretching like memories. She stopped in front of room 208, the door slightly ajar, a frosted glass pane offering a blurred view inside. Lila was asleep. A small child, her back to the door, hugging a teddy bear, wrapped in thick blankets. The man beside her, Nathan, sat slumped in sleep, his face tilted toward the girl, as if leaning into his own exhausted dreams. Rachel couldn't see her daughter's face clearly, but she knew in a way that needed no confirmation. By the way those messy strands of hair fell across her forehead, by how she tugged the blanket up to her chin, a habit from when she was little. and by that ache, rising without a name, softening her knees with emotion. She didn't knock, didn't enter. She just stood there, close enough to see every movement inside, far enough that no one inside knew she was watching. The girl kept breathing steadily, no panic, no startle, as if that room belonged to a different world, a safe world, with someone guarding her sleep, someone who wouldn't leave. That someone was Nathan Grayson, a man Rachel had never met, but whose name had surfaced once in a whisper from an old church neighbor. He slept in the chair, head tilted toward the girl, one hand resting on the bed's edge. A quiet gesture, but enough to tell Rachel Lila was being cared for. Rachel exhaled, not from relief, but because for 4 years she had never let herself believe anyone else could truly care for Lila. Her hand touched the glass, gently enough not to leave a trace. But inside, old scars stirred, memories of being called an unstable mother, of trying to speak, to cry, to explain, only to receive cold stares and the judge's nod. He had taken her child, then left her in the woods, like an animal. The rage she had long buried beneath fear now simmered like lava. Not a wild rage, but the kind of lucid fury that was dangerous in its clarity. She would take back what he stole, whatever it took. Inside, Lila stirred, pulled the blanket tighter, her lips murmuring something inaudible. Rachel couldn't hear, but her heart clenched. If she stepped in now, she didn't know what she'd do. She might cry. Lila might not recognize her. She might be scared. Rachel wasn't ready for that, not from weakness, but because she knew the time hadn't come. Suddenly, soft footsteps behind her. "Excuse me, are you looking for someone?" A young nurse stood behind her, kind-faced, holding a clipboard. Rachel startled slightly, then turned, adjusting her scarf, eyes lowered. "No, I was just passing by. I used to have someone here." "This room's for special care," the nurse said softly. "The patient needs rest. If your family—" "I'm not," Rachel cut in. Her voice was calm, but her eyes had already turned away. "Thank you." Then she walked off, not fast, not slow, each step carrying a piece of memory back to its rightful place, waiting for the moment it would be called upon. In the corridor, the fluorescent lights faded ahead, quiet, pale, but this time Rachel wasn't afraid. Because even without knowing the path, she had found her direction. And you, if you were Rachel, would you have the courage to return, knowing you might be rejected again? Comment yes, if you would take that step. Comment no, if you'd wait a little longer for a clearer sign. The town of Kingswell sat nestled within a dense forest, its roads winding along the hillsides and its sparse neighborhoods scattered like whispers. On foggy early mornings, all sounds seemed swallowed, except for the soft chime of wind bells from the cafe at the corner, where people still gathered each day to sip weak coffee, listen to an old radio, and gossip about things no one dared confirm as entirely true. On the main road leading out of town, the small white-painted building of the local police station sat tucked beneath a row of maple trees shedding their leaves. Inside, Sheriff Tom Whitaker, a man in his 50s, formerly stationed in Denver before transferring to this small town to avoid the storms, was reviewing a report sent by Eleanor Monroe. Tom was a man of few words, with deep-set eyes, a low voice, and sun-worn skin, but he carried a calm presence that made it hard for others to guess what he was thinking. Still, those who knew him long enough understood this. If he stared at a report for more than 3 minutes in silence, he was about to act. The girl said, "Her father took her into the woods?" Tom asked. Eleanor nodded. Doesn't match Andrew Bennett's initial statement. He said Lila got lost while walking in the park with his new wife. Tom frowned. Which park did he say it was? Shady Pines. But that forest's been closed off for a while due to venomous snake sightings. No one takes kids in there. Tom closed the file and stood up. Call Carter. I want to check the cameras around Shady Pines. On the east side of town, Emily Hart, a freelance journalist living in a cramped apartment above an air conditioner repair shop, was on the phone, typing rapidly on her laptop while scribbling notes by hand. Emily had once worked for a major city paper, but after a medical corruption expose led to her suspension, she chose to leave city life behind and move to Kingswell. Since then, she'd made a living by writing freelance investigative pieces. Quietly, directly, and always chasing the stories hidden in the margins. Internal word from the hospital confirms the unidentified girl is being treated in room 208, said a close source on the other end. Has any mother come to claim her yet? Emily asked. Number A. But there's a woman standing outside the room. She hasn't gone in. Might be the mother. Emily reopened an old case file. That name, Rachel Bennett, had come up in a contentious divorce 4 years ago. She marked the page's corner and saved her latest draft, when truth hangs on the edge of public opinion. At Reynolds General Store, a small shop that also served as a gas station near the forest, Sheriff Tom and Officer Carter were reviewing surveillance footage. Jake Reynolds, the shop owner, was a middle-aged man who'd lived in Kingswell since before smartphones existed. He wasn't close with anyone, but he kept every receipt, note, and video like they were the most precious things he owned. Here, Jake pointed to the screen. Last week in the morning, a silver SUV stopped at the edge of Shady Pines. Plate matches Andrew Bennett's vehicle. Tom watched the footage closely. A tall man in a grey coat stepped out, walked around to the back seat. Within seconds, he disappeared behind the trees. When he came back, Jake said softly, he was alone. Tom didn't show much reaction, but his hand tightened slightly. In the hospital room where Lila had been staying for days, sunlight filtered in gently through the window, casting a pale, golden hue over the thin blanket, like the season's final warmth. Lila was better now. No more IVs, no more fever. But she still said little. Her eyes, though alert, always seemed to avoid contact, as if every adult who came near brought a question she didn't want to answer. Sheriff Tom entered with Eleanor and an investigator, Carter. After a short discussion, Tom turned to Nathan. We need more time to build the case. The girl's condition is no longer critical, and staying in the hospital this long isn't good for her mental state. Social services haven't found a placement yet. Nathan stayed silent, sensing what was being implied. Eleanor added, her voice careful but not cold. If you're willing, we can authorize temporary custody during the investigation. It's not formal adoption, but you'd act as her temporary guardian. No one pressured him, but Nathan understood. If he said no, she'd be sent away, to another unfamiliar place. All right, Nathan nodded. I'll take her home. When they were alone, Nathan sat at the edge of the bed. Lila was drawing, faint pencil strokes, messy but clear, a house, some bushes, and a tiny sun above. You like drawing, huh? Nathan began. Lila nodded faintly, eyes still on the paper. Is that house somewhere you've lived before? No, Lila murmured. I just made it up. Nathan smiled. Want to try drawing the place you're going to next? Lila paused. What do you mean? You can't stay here forever. They said I could bring you home for a while, until everything's sorted out. She turned away, didn't object, but didn't agree either. A flicker of a smile crossed her lips, faint but real. Lila nodded. Okay. That afternoon, at Nathan Grayson's house, the man who had rescued Lila, the air felt a little heavier. Lucas Grayson, Nathan's 15-year-old nephew, was making coffee. He'd lived with his uncle ever since his parents divorced and had always kept his distance from everything, even sympathy. But since Lila arrived, Lucas felt something had changed in the house. Less quiet, but also less cold. Lucas had overheard a conversation between Nathan and an officer. When they were gone, he walked over and placed a cup of coffee in front of his uncle. "I heard," Lucas said bluntly. "The girl, she was really left behind." Nathan nodded, saying nothing. "Then why didn't you tell anyone sooner?" Nathan looked at his nephew, voice calm. "Because telling people early on doesn't mean they'll believe you." Lucas fell silent, then sighed quietly. "If it were me, I probably wouldn't know who to trust either." A few days later, in her cluttered apartment, Emily sat surrounded by files, dark circles under her eyes, flipping through documents. She paused at a divorce case file from 2020, Andrew Bennett and Rachel Bennett. Digging deeper, she found a report from a private psychiatric evaluation center, used as grounds for Rachel losing custody. But the last note made Emily freeze. No physician signed for verification. Document was submitted by husband's attorney. Emily leaned back in her chair, eyes closed. Something was very wrong. Sunday morning. Sunlight gently streamed onto the windowsill of the wooden house by the hill, once home to only one person, and now echoed with the sound of soft footsteps, the scrape of a small chair, and the click of a door opening every morning. Lila still woke early, like any child used to restless sleep. But unlike the hospital, here she could climb out of bed, find Nathan making coffee, and there was always an empty chair waiting at the kitchen table. Nathan never asked what she dreamed about. He simply handed her a warm glass of milk and asked, "Cereal or toast?" Lila usually didn't answer, but she sat down, and that was enough. At the town's community center, Leah Sand's small gallery was filled with children's art, clumsy drawings in bright colors, but only one piece hung alone in a dark wooden frame. It was Lila's. Leah was an artist who had lived in Vermont before moving to Kingswell to teach. She had no children, but had long believed, drawing is the only way a child can say what adults don't want to hear. She first met Lila on a Wednesday morning during a trial art session arranged by Eleanor Monroe. Lila said nothing. She simply picked up a black pencil and sat quietly. She drew a tree without leaves, and beneath it, the silhouette of a figure turned away, standing in a patch of tangled grass. The drawing made Leah exhale softly. "You know how to draw a horizon line," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Lila didn't look up, but for a moment, Leah was certain. This child wasn't imagining, she was remembering. Elsewhere, when Rachel received news that Lila had been placed in the home of a man named Nathan Grayson, she said nothing. She simply packed her bag, walked from Mary Ellis's house to the public library, and retrieved a copy of the psychiatric evaluation from 4 years ago, the file that had cost her custody. When Emily Hart, the freelance journalist who had visited the day before, arrived, Rachel handed her the worn stack of papers. "Take a look. No doctor's signature, only a law firm stamp, my ex-husband's." Emily examined each page, frowning. "I know someone who can verify this." That someone was Professor Esther Bloom, a forensic psychologist at Pacifica University, who had worked on dozens of juvenile cases. With support from Eleanor Monroe, Emily arranged an independent psychological evaluation for Lila. For the first time, outside a hospital. They met at Nathan's home. Esther didn't bring a stack of questions. She simply sat beside Lila at the kitchen table, placed a few black and white photos in front of her, trees, hands, silhouettes, and gently asked, "Have you ever thought you deserved to be left behind?" Lila shook her head. Do you think it was your fault? Lila looked down. A long silence. Then softly, no. But if I wasn't there, maybe Dad wouldn't have been angry. Esther didn't write anything down. She simply looked at Nathan standing by the doorway, then at Emily. This is not a child trying to deceive anyone. She doesn't need to be believed. She needs to be acknowledged. At the same time, outside, the storm was rising. The news site Family Watch published a long article accusing Nathan of staging the situation for publicity. They used a photo of him outside the hospital with a headline, "The Widower and the Undocumented Child, a Perfect PR Script." Comments beneath the post were split. Who brings home someone else's child unless they have an agenda? If he's really that good, why won't he let Lila speak publicly? Nathan didn't respond. But that evening, he stood for a long time on the porch, phone in hand, switching it off, turning it on, reading, deleting, until in the end, he messaged no one. Lucas, his nephew, stood in the kitchen, watching through the crack in the door. He said nothing. He simply placed an extra thin blanket on the nearby sofa, where Nathan usually fell asleep after midnight. Emily made a decision. She arranged a meeting with Judge Judith Cole, the one set to oversee the case, soon heading to court. Judith was a woman who had broken many records in law, the youngest female judge in the region when she was appointed, but known for never letting political pressure affect her rulings. In her office, she greeted Emily with eyes that weren't harsh, but not easily moved. "You've come to ask me to take a side. Number I've come to ask. If you were that child, left behind, disbelieved, what would you want an adult to do?" Judith didn't answer immediately. She tapped her pen lightly on the file on her desk. The truth doesn't need to be shouted. It needs to be seen. The next day, a subpoena was officially issued for Andrew Bennett. At a short press briefing, the spokesperson for the investigation confirmed, "Mr. Andrew Bennett has been summoned on charges of abandoning a minor in a dangerous situation." Andrew, when approached by reporters, only said one sentence, "Another trick by those who want to take me down out of spite. My daughter, if she's saying something, she must be remembering it wrong." That night, in the small wooden house, Lila sat beside Nathan in an armchair, looking through her sketchbook. She pointed to one drawing and whispered, "This person is Dad." Nathan didn't ask how she knew. He simply placed a hand on her shoulder, light as breath. "It's okay. I'll be here until that person doesn't scare you anymore." Late afternoon, pale sunlight spilled across the long hallway of the private law firm where Evan Blake practiced. Inside, the sound of keyboards clicking fast and steady echoed like a ticking clock. No one looked at each other longer than a glance. Every conversation seemed more like preparation for a lawsuit than a life. Evan Blake, in his early 40s, hair slicked back, smile brief like a punctuation mark. Known as the undefeated negotiator, he had saved many scandal-ridden figures from falling into the public's pit of judgment, even though they had dug it themselves. To Evan, nature didn't matter. The story was what determined victory. Andrew Bennett sat across from him, wearing sunglasses indoors. His gestures belonged to someone unafraid of the system, unafraid of judgment. He only feared losing control. "What will she say?" Evan asked, opening a thick folder. "She'll say I left the girl in the woods, that I'm a demon in human skin." Andrew shrugged. "But what matters is, no one saw it. No video, no footage. Just the words of a child and a woman who was once psychiatrically evaluated. We'll use exactly that." Evan nodded. "I'll review Rachel's entire medical record. If there's ever been a diagnosis of instability, then everything she says is just a symptom." That evening, Gloria, Andrew's second wife, appeared at a private press conference hosted by the Family Watch Group. In an elegant dress, holding a white handkerchief trimmed with lace, Gloria spoke in a slow voice, as if regretting, "I'm very sorry for everything, but Rachel once hit the girl. I was the one who took her to a private clinic, where she was diagnosed with emotional disorder tendencies. I didn't want to say this, but now I can't stay silent anymore." The camera zoomed in on Gloria's tearful face. Viewers saw a brave mother protecting a child. No one saw the hand clutching the handkerchief until it was crumpled. Elsewhere, Emily Hart, after days tracing information from old administrative records, found her way to a former snake camp that had been shut down in the southern part of Shady Pines Forest. The camp's owner, Howard Green, was in his 60s. He lived alone, looked after a few remaining animals, and kept all the records from when the camp was still active. Andrew Bennett. Howard nodded when he heard the name. "I remember him." Emily opened her notebook. "You're sure?" "Someone like that came asking early last year." He nodded again. Didn't give a name, but silver car, expensive leather shoes, voice like someone used to others doing things for him. What did he ask? Where in the woods still had snakes, not the tame kind, the venomous ones. Emily wrote down every detail. Then she looked up and asked, "Did you ever consider reporting it to the police?" Howard chuckled softly. "I'm used to people keeping snakes not for the love of animals. I just didn't think someone would use them to abandon their own child." Rachel arrived at Nathan Grayson's house on a cold morning in early October, when dew still clung to the grass and the sun hadn't yet cleared the trees. She didn't call ahead, didn't phone. The one who opened the door was Lucas, a boy with sharp eyes and a curt voice, who hesitated, looking at the slender woman before him with obvious caution. "I am Lila's mother," Rachel said, not softening her tone, not pleading, just a truth that needed to be heard properly. Lucas nodded, then disappeared inside. Minutes later, Nathan himself stepped out, face stern. "Can you give me a moment?" he said, one hand on the doorframe, shoulders tilted as if blocking out an uninvited world. Rachel nodded. They sat on a wooden bench on the porch. Nathan didn't ask why she came. He asked, "Why didn't you show up these past 4 years, file an appeal, speak up?" Rachel pulled out a stack of old papers from her coat pocket, and the edges yellowed. "This is why. They sent me for evaluation at a private clinic. No doctor, just stamped papers. The court didn't investigate further. My ex-husband hired better lawyers than I could hire justice." She paused, eyes fixed on the empty yard. "And they said if I tried to get near Lila, I'd be arrested for harassment. I believed I'd lost the right to be a mother." Nathan stared at the papers in her hand. A brief silence, then he said, "Come inside." "She's drawing." Rachel stepped into the kitchen, like someone returning to a place that no longer remembered her scent. No pictures on the wall, no toys scattered around, but the smell of milk, baked goods, and presents lingered. Lila sat with her back turned, head bent over paper. The only sound was the steady scratching of pencil. When Rachel stepped closer, the girl looked up, eyes meeting the woman she had only dared call by name in her dreams. No one spoke. Rachel took one step at a time, pulled out the opposite chair, her hands on the table, not trembling, but empty. Nathan stood at the door, not interfering. "She's your mother," he said simply. Lila looked at Rachel, not fearful, not joyful. It was the look of someone asking if the world was real, or just one more thing that would disappear. "I know I wasn't there when you needed me," Rachel began, her voice even, like thread stitching up old tears. But I never stopped thinking about you. Not one day. Lila blinked. I thought you didn't want to find me. I did. But they said I wasn't normal enough to be a mother, and I foolishly believed them. A minute passed. Then Lila put down her pencil. She stood, not slowly, not hurried, and walked over. She lightly touched Rachel's hand, like touching a shadow that had followed her all her childhood. No hug, no tears. But her face softened, like the first breeze after a long winter. That afternoon, Nathan called Rachel out to the porch. On the table was the tablet he used for storing documents. There's something I think you should hear from her directly. He played a recording. Lila's voice came through, soft, steady, almost a breath. When Dad closed the door, he locked it from the outside. I didn't cry, but I remember being hungry for 2 days. Once, the stepmother, she poured water into my bowl of noodles and said that food was for the dog. I was beaten with the broomstick. I didn't know why. Maybe because I didn't call her Mom. Nathan stopped the playback. Rachel sat there, face pale. Her hands on her lap trembled slightly. Lila told you this, to me, and to her art teacher. She said the girl draws without tears, but every picture feels cold and wet. Silence stretched. Then Nathan quietly said, "We can't let this go on. We can't let a child carry grown-up scars one more day." Rachel nodded. For the first time, that nod no longer avoided anything. "Whatever it takes," she said, "as long as she's no longer called a mistake." In the interrogation room at the police station, Andrew was officially summoned. In front of him was a copy of a video from a gas station, his car appearing at the forest's edge, the exact time Lila went missing. "Do you have anything to say?" the officer asked. "Like any other father, I took my child out for a drive," he smirked. "The girl played around, got lost. I reported her missing. But people don't see that." "There's evidence you asked about venomous snakes," Emily, invited to the hearing, countered. Andrew leaned back, exhaled. "A child nobody wanted. My ex-wife is insane. Don't bring emotion into the law. I'm the one being slandered here." The courtroom was packed. In the back rows, journalists typed quietly. People whispered. Not because someone famous was involved, but because today, a child would face the one who once abandoned her. In broad daylight, under the lights, and before a system long doubted by all. Judge Judith Cole sat at the center, sharp in a pale grey suit, her eyes never leaving the defendant. Andrew Bennett wore a suit, legs crossed, his face calm. Beside him, attorney Evan Blake held a folder like a well-prepared prop for the performance ahead. The prosecutor opened. "Your Honor, this is a case that needs no lengthy accusation. The victim is a 7-year-old girl. The accused is her biological father. We have photographic evidence, audio recordings, independent witness testimonies, and most importantly, we have the truth." Officer Carter was called to the stand. He displayed footage from a gas station camera. Andrew's silver Ford pulled up to the edge of Shady Pines Forest at 1847, the same day Lila went missing. Andrew stepped out, opened the trunk, and took out a plastic box. Next, GPS data from the car system. The vehicle left the forest area alone, with no signal from the rear passenger seat during the return trip. Carter continued, "We confirm Mr. Bennett disabled the child safety seat at 19:01, only 14 minutes after leaving the last stop." Witness testimony. Mr. Howard Green, owner of an old snake farm, stood and spoke clearly. "He once asked me about places where venomous snakes still existed, somewhere remote, not yet fenced off. Those were his exact words." Lawyer Evan objected. "He didn't give his name. How can you be sure it was the defendant?" Howard shrugged. "He wore Italian leather shoes, opened a gold-plated wallet, and drove the same car I just saw in the video. I don't meet two men like that in a year. Journalist Emily Hart added more evidence. We verified that Rachel Bennett's mental health diagnosis papers were fake. The issuing clinic had shut down. No doctor signed the report. And one more thing. She displayed a screenshot, an appeal application that had been denied because Andrew's legal team blocked it. Rachel didn't lose custody because of illness, but because she had no power. Lawyer Evan countered. He stepped forward, voice calm. Everyone wants to believe in an emotional story, but a court doesn't rely on emotions. The child is influenced by those around her, and we haven't proven that Mr. Bennett intended to abandon his child. It could have been an accident, a misunderstanding. Lila stepped forward, holding a worn teddy bear that Linda, the court clerk, had gently prepared in advance. She spoke softly, in a steady, almost whispered rhythm. "Daddy, let me sit under the tree. He said he was going to get food, but he didn't come back. I counted to 50, then more. Then I stopped counting. A snake went by. I didn't move, but I was hungrier than I was scared. When it got dark, I thought maybe Mummy didn't want to see me anymore, but then someone came. They didn't ask anything. They didn't scold me. They just gave me a coat and sat down at my level." Nathan stood, finally releasing the fury he had carried. Amid the silence, he stepped forward without waiting to be called. His voice cracked, each word cutting clear, without shouting. "That girl doesn't need a father. She needs someone who won't leave her again. I'm not a hero. I was just there at the right time. But the ones who should have been chose to leave. No one is allowed to hurt her again. Not for money. Not for reputation. Not for legal custody on paper." Judge Judith scanned the courtroom, her eyes lingering longest on Andrew, who twisted his hands under the table, eyes red not from emotion, but from realizing there was no way out. The court finds defendant Andrew Bennett guilty of the intentional abandonment of a minor, endangering her life. Remand into custody immediately. An order is issued to investigate Gloria Bennett for providing falsified medical documents, effective today. In the silence that followed, Lila turned toward her mother. Rachel smiled. No tears, no bitterness. Just a mother, finally standing in the right place. Lila gripped her hand tighter and for the first time smiled. Not because the bad man was punished, but because for the first time so many had chosen to stay. The light in the courtroom that day didn't come from the ceiling or the floodlights, but from a child sitting quietly, holding a worn-out teddy bear, looking around the room where, at last, the adults were ready to listen. Lila stepped out of the courthouse, her hand never leaving Rachel's. It wasn't the firm grip of a close mother and child, but a tentative touch, like someone who'd once been abandoned, now checking. Am I really not being left behind this time? Rachel went home with Nathan and Lila, carrying a verdict of justice, but her heart was far from settled. She stayed awake for many nights, watching the child sleep, her hand resting on her stomach, as if to make sure this place was truly safe, not just a dream. Nathan grew quieter. He spent his time outside, sawing wood, clearing debris, patching the roof. No one asked, but everyone knew. He was rebuilding a life, not just his own, but for those who'd been let go too easily by the world. One morning, as Rachel prepared breakfast, Nathan walked in with hands covered in sawdust. He placed a sketch on the table, a small wooden house, 2 rooms, a wide porch, and large windows facing the forest. "I want to build this," he said, "not just for Lila." Rachel looked at the drawing, then asked, "For other children?" He nodded. "For the ones no one stopped the car for." She said nothing more, just turned back to the stove and added more flour to the batch of muffins. The first house was raised from the frame of an old camp. No signboard, no slogans, but a journalist from the group The Voice of the Forgotten, after visiting, called it the House in the Forest of Light. and the name stuck. There was no grand opening. People came in old pickup trucks, carrying shovels, paint, broken chairs. Children were brought from local welfare offices. No fanfare, no dramatics, just a roof. The small exhibition building sat at the end of the town's main street, a place that, for most of the year, was only used for community parties or old-fashioned fairs. But today, the white curtain at the front was drawn back. Nameplates were carefully pinned on every corner of the walls, and in the soft yellow light filling the room, something strange had happened. The whole town had come to see the paintings of a 7-year-old girl. Lila stood by the window, wearing a simple white dress, holding the list of paintings in her hand. She didn't know who to look at, so she kept her eyes on the new shoes Rachel had bought her that morning. Leah Sand, the artist who had taught her her very first brushstrokes, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Just breathe. This is your space. No one asks for anything more than the truth. Lila nodded, then looked up, long enough to see Rachel standing in the corner of the room, beside Nathan. They didn't push their way to the front. They just stood there, watching her, as they had promised. "We'll be in the back, if you need us." People walked past each painting, not speaking loudly. No one laughed. They just paused, looked for a long while, then moved on. Each picture was a slice, not of art, but of memories that had never been allowed to be told. One was a dark room with the shadow of someone facing away. Another, a grassy hill where no one came to pick her up. One showed an adult hand holding a belt, and a child's eyes that could not close. None of them had captions. Leah stopped in front of the largest painting in the room, carefully placed at the very center, as if everything else had been quietly arranged around it. For a long moment, she said nothing. The brushstrokes were still uncertain, raw in a way only a child's hand could create. But within their unevenness was something gripping, something that made the air feel heavier, like a held breath no one dared release. The scene depicted a dense, shadowy forest, trees indistinct but towering, their outlines bleeding into one another like memories half-remembered. The ground was covered with sparse, uneven patches of grass, painted in dull greens and browns, as if light had long abandoned the place. In the center of the canvas, a small girl sat alone. Her body was hunched inward, shoulders drawn tight as though trying to become invisible. She clutched a teddy bear to her chest, its fur worn, one ear limp, the color faded to grayish threadbare patches. It looked as though it had been held through many silent nights. Beyond her, far in the background, two soft smudges of yellow broke the darkness. Headlights, dim and blurry, like they were coming from a great distance or through a fogged window. And between the girl and the light, a figure emerged. A man's silhouette, just barely defined, stood at the edge of the scene. One hand was lifting his coat, mid-motion, the other slightly extended, palm open. His posture was neither aggressive nor demanding, just quiet, hesitant, present, as though he was offering not rescue, but presence. It wasn't a picture that shouted. It was one that listened, and made the viewer listen too, and the shadow of a man, bending down, one hand taking off his coat, the other reaching out, ready to hold the girl. Leah leaned in. "Have you given this one a name?" Lila answered softly, without looking up. "I call it the one who didn't leave." At the end of the exhibition, Lila was invited to speak. There was no podium, no stage lights, just a small chair, and everyone sitting around her. She looked around the room, then at Leah. Leah nodded, just as she always did when Lila made a mistake in her drawing. Lila spoke slowly, very clearly. "I used to think I was left behind, that if I disappeared, no one would remember. But then I understood. There are people, even if they're not your parents, who still choose not to turn away. They are the light, Not dazzling, but just enough to help you find the way. Sometimes light doesn't come from the sun or bright spotlights, but from a person, just one person, who chooses not to turn away when you are at your weakest. Lila's story wasn't just about a child's journey to reclaim justice. It was also a quiet reminder. Love doesn't always wear a family name. It just needs the courage to stay. And what about you? Have you ever been a small light in someone's darkness? Or are you still silently waiting for someone to turn back? And if you're reading these words before sleep, take a sip of warm water. You've done really well today. Good night to you, who have always been gentle enough not to turn away.